Well, hello, I'm Louise and extremely welcome to my channel. I don't think I can get my words out. That's not a good sign, is it? I love to muse about books, and I'd like to welcome back anybody who's been bold enough to view my channel before and has returned, and an equally warm welcome to anyone who's viewing my wafflings for the very first time. So I've had an absolutely fantastic reading month. I haven't had a duff book, which is always brilliant. And I feel as though I've read quite a range of books, some quite chunky books. So without further ado, I will dive in. So first of all, I started the month with this book, Moon Road by Sarah Leipciger. And this book is set in Canada. It focuses on two male and female protagonists, I suppose. They were married. They had a daughter, and when her daughter was in her 20s, she disappeared. And she disappeared up near Vancouver, which is sort of 2,000 miles north, I want to say, of where the town that they actually are currently living in. They are no longer husband and wife, but they maintained a very sort of civilized relationship initially after they broke up, and then it imploded. So when the novel opens, they haven't seen each other for 19 years, and during all this time they haven't known what has happened to their daughter. They don't know whether she's alive, they don't know whether she's dead. There's still this huge mystery around it, and the novel begins, the sort of catalyst for the novel is that some bones are found roughly in the area where the daughter disappeared all those years ago. And Yannick, the former husband, doesn't like flying. So they decide that they both need to go up to be there when these bones are identified. They've got to give DNA, etc., etc. And so they take this road trip. So having not spoken for 19 years, they go on this road trip up the coast of Canada to Vancouver. And I found this book incredibly compelling. I think for me, what I loved about it was the portrayal of the relationship between these two characters, and their psychology is so on the money. I really believed in these two people and the way they felt about each other, and the way they felt about, you know, the people that surround their lives. I loved the fact that there's a lot in here about nature and gardening, because I'm trying to remember the name of, I know he was called Yannick, what's her name? Kathleen, that's right. I love the fact that Kathleen, she's got her own business where she grows flowers and things, and of course I'm a really keen gardener, so I kind of enjoyed, doesn't dwell on that, but I like that as the backdrop to her personality. She's quite a very determined woman, very sort of independent. I like the way they each hold a mirror up to themselves. There is not, you know, on the surface of it, you'd think it was a bit thrillery. It is in a way, but there isn't a strong narrative arc in this book. It's much more about, I think, them and their relationships and the impact of grief. You know, the loss of their daughter and the fact that they, you know, it's still inconclusive what's happened to her. Is sort of a shadow over their lives, and the way they sort of deal with that, and that affects them, is really interesting. And their wider families, in particular his, because he's got other children, and her relationship with them, and his former wives, because he's had several. And the other thing I think I loved is she's in her 60s, he's in his 70s. So you've got a portrayal of these two people who are older, who are making an incredibly long journey. I mean, they're driving hundreds of miles every day, or at least she is. You know, and the toll it takes on their body, the toll it takes on their interactions with each other is just, I just, well, you can probably tell, I absolutely love this book. I really highly commend it to you. And it was a surprise. You know, I didn't know anything about the author. Yeah, and I didn't know much about the book, but I was just in the mood for something like this, and it really worked for me. And then because it was my 60th birthday during this month, earlier on in the month, I treated myself to reading There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak. I know lots of you have already read this novel, and it was my novel of the month this month, so I'm not going to go on about it for too long. But I'd held this novel back because I got a feeling I would really enjoy it. And I think I said, on my earlier video about this book specifically, that I almost felt like it had been written for me, which is a very arrogant thing to say. But the British Museum features, it's about the ancient world. There is a king from ancient Mesopotamia who opens the story. We have, we have ancient tablets, we have Gilgamesh, we have the myth of we have, so we've got the Assyrians. All of that ancient history is something that I'm really fascinated by. So I really enjoyed that was kind of the backdrop to the novel. But what I wasn't quite expecting was to fall in love so much with some of the characters. I mean, the character of Arthur, who's a young, incredibly poor, he's living right on the margins of society, Victorian boy living on the edge of the Thames. The way his character is developed, and the way that you are encouraged to feel about him as a human, living in poverty, but very, very, very clever. He's got this incredible memory. He can even remember his birth. It's brilliant. And because of that, he learns to read, and he becomes involved in the printing industry, etc., etc. Don't spoil it for those of you who've not read it yet. And he becomes fascinated because on the day that the Lamassus these are ancient mythical figures carved in stone, and they are, I pass them on a regular basis because when I go down to London, I very often find myself in the British Museum, and these Lamassus are right by the Greek section, the ancient Greek section, which I've taken many students to over the years. So they're really important in my head. They're magnificent sculptures. Google them if you haven't seen what they look like. But anyway, Arthur walks past the British Museum on the day that these creatures are being taken into the museum, and that sparks his interest in ancient Mesopotamia. I'm not going to say any more about that, I don't want to spoil it. But you've also got two female characters, so the narrative moves from character to character. You've got Zuleika, who's a hydrologist. She's a water scientist. She is living on a barge on the Thames. She's had a relationship breakup. She's got a very fraught and difficult relationship with her uncle and aunt, who are incredibly wealthy. I found that very interesting. And then you've got Narin, who's living in modern day Turkey, and who is part of an oppressed minority. And her story didn't engage me quite as much initially, but then I began to realise as the novel progressed just how important her story was, because Elif Shafak is trying to say something about borders, about refugee status, about how we need more humanity, how we should be seeing people as other human beings, not putting them in boxes, pigeonholing people. There's a lot in here about prejudice, and also how history casts a shadow, how one particular ethnic group can be invested with certain qualities through history, and it's so difficult to shake those qualities off and that prejudice off. So there's a lot in here about stigma, but also about climate change, about the impact of water. I mean, there are rivers in the sky. It starts off with this single drop of water which keeps reappearing. This raindrop keeps reappearing at different points through the novel, and links and binds the characters together. So I think the novel is beautifully structured. There are rivers flowing through this book. There's the Thames, there's the Euphrates, there's the Tigris. I could go on, but if you want to find out more, just have a look at my book of the month video for November, because I go into it in a bit more detail. Anyway, there we are. I adored this. And then as the prompt for, it might have been October or November, I can't remember, for the Savage Prompts 2025, the prompt was you had to read the book, not the oldest book on your shelf, the book that had been sat on your shelf the longest. And so I chose The Grasshopper and Other Stories by Anton Chekhov. As you can see, it's a really old volume. I've had to do a little repair job on the spine because the card had fallen off the spine. But I love reading old books like this. I picked this up in a second-hand shop. It was 50p, and it used to belong to somebody called Madge Castle, who's written her name in there in pencil. So I enjoyed the physical experience of reading this. The pages are really smooth and silky, and I love the shape of it. It's kind of palm-sized book. So I just love the feeling of it in my hand. Anyway, I had never read any Chekhov before. Well, no, that's not true. I think I might have read some of his plays. I've certainly seen a few of his plays, seen The Cherry Orchard. But I do really enjoy Russian literature. I loved War and Peace. I love Anna Karenina. I'm trying to think what else. Can't think off the top of my head. But I do think there's something about Russian narrative of that era that's really compelling, and I thoroughly enjoyed these stories because they focus on ordinary people, again a bit like Arthur, often living on the margins of Russian society. The elements play an important part. You've got, they're living in very basic accommodation. The women are really forthright often in the families. The men feel downtrodden by the women. There's a lot of drinking. There's a lot of misdemeanors. Some very judgmental characters, and characters from all walks of life. But mainly, I guess, I think Chekhov was kind of giving a voice and shining a light on peasant life. And I just, my favourite was the story about the black monk. There's an academic, he's a master of arts, and he's been working ever so hard, and he sort of he encounters this black monk on his bed, and it's a bit like sort of, is it depression, what is it? And this black monk, it keeps appearing, and just the descriptions, and as a reader you don't know whether it's real or imagined or what it is. So yeah, there's lots of sort of nods to folklore and some real humor. I mean, some very, very funny scenes. So yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed my first sort of dip into Chekhov's short stories. And then for the Women's Prize hashtag 30 and 30 campaign, I read The History of Love by Nicole Krauss. Again, I've done a little reading vlog on this if you want to know more about it. But I utterly adored this book. I am so glad. I now think I need to go back. Simon Savage, my son, we read, I can't remember, it might have been a couple of years ago, but we read the entire backlist of Women's Prize winners. Now, that wasn't as hard as it sounds because we'd already both read quite a lot of them before we started, but we decided we were going to fill the gaps. So now I'm thinking, this was a shortlisted book in 2006, and I have read one of, I think it's called Great House, Nicole Krauss's subsequent books, but this one, I think this is a masterpiece. I really, really loved it. It's set in Brooklyn, and it focuses on a really elderly Jewish Pole who fled Poland as a consequence of the Nazis in Germany, and he is one of the most fully fleshed elderly men I've ever encountered in literature. I just loved him, his preoccupations, his every ache and pain. This is a book that is full of secrets and mysteries. There were moments in this novel that absolutely took my breath away, literally. Things that I wasn't expecting to happen, and things that affected me, gave me a real physical, guttural, vital reaction to to these events or these moments as well. And again, it's not really heavily plot driven, but there's quite a lot to work out. If you're somebody who enjoys reading and likes a challenge, there are various mysteries in this novel. So there's him, there's Leo, and then there is Alma, who's a young 15-year-old girl. So you've got somebody at the end of life, somebody, near the beginning of life. She's trying to make sense of the world. Her father's died. Her mum is incredibly lonely and just obsessed with her job of translating. Doesn't really take an awful lot of notice of her children. She's got an incredibly eccentric brother. So she sort of writes in these little fragments. So you get her voice and his voice. And both of them are really interested in books and in a specific book. And so there's an awful lot in here about the power of the novel, about the power of literature to move, what it's like to create literature and promote literature and produce literature. Absolutely wonderful book. Can't recommend it highly enough. Although, I'm just going to pick it up again. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this edition. This is a Penguin edition, and I think it's probably quite a recent one. But the font is absolutely tiny. I did struggle with that. I think it's a real shame because, again, I really like the size of it. I just wish they'd made the font a bit bigger and made it a bit thicker. Now, as I've said, I'm a really keen gardener, and I've got a reasonable sized garden, and our garden backs onto a churchyard. And there is a massive sycamore tree in that churchyard, which houses thousands of, well, I thought they were crows, but I've never been quite sure. And all the time I'm gardening, no matter what time of year, the background is not, the background noise is not the tweeting of blackbirds and finches and all that kind of thing. It's the noise that these corvids are making. So I've been really fascinated by them. And so this book, Crow Country, was recommended to me by Mark. It's by Mark Cocker, and it was recommended to me a few years ago by the wonderful Mike Parker, who wrote On the Red Hill. He's such a lovely man, and he knows a lot about nature. And I was saying I'd just love to know more about crows. So I've only just got round to reading this. It's a book I've had in my possession for a while, and I romantically thought that I would lie in my garden while the crows were doing whatever they're doing and read it. So I'd sort of decided that I was going to read it over a summer. Anyway, it never happened because in the summer I'm just too busy doing things in the garden. So I thought I'm never going to get round to reading it if I'm not careful. So I read it recently. What an amazing book. Mark Cocker, I mean, it's non-fiction, obviously. It's about he's from Derbyshire, actually, which is my neck of the woods, where I was born, same county, and he's a naturalist. I have to be careful. I sometimes get naturalist and naturalist mixed up, and they are quite different things. So he's a naturalist, and he moved to Norfolk. So he lives on the River Yare in Norfolk, and he became obsessed with studying crows to the point where he'd regularly travel up to Scotland, different parts of Europe, to observe crows. So, and very little is known about them. That was the other thing, actually, I found out in a way more questions than answers. But these birds are absolutely flipping fascinating. Partly, one of the big puzzles is why they live in these big congregations. What are the benefits to them? And there are various different theories about that. But the other thing that was such a surprise is that, and I don't know why I'm constantly surprised by this, as a sort of converted reader of nonfiction, the writing in this book is beautiful. The way he describes the landscape, where he lives, the way he describes the seasons, journeys, the flight of birds. Oh my goodness, it's just utterly beautiful. And I particularly enjoyed the sort of, I think it was the last chapter or the penultimate chapter, where he really he explores his fascination with these birds, and he looks at the connection between human psychology and observation of the natural world, and he looks at sort of they're his own kind of case studies in a way, but there are two examples of men who became naturalists as the result of horrendous consequences in their lives. So, for example, there's a group of men in the Second World War who, while they were in German prison camps in Europe, took records of the movement of crows and actually published those records, which, you know, he said reading it was just absolutely fascinating, thinking, you know, they had nothing to do all day. So they tracked these birds. And then there was a Victorian gentleman, I can't remember, it might have been about 1830. He went out to a tiny island off Australia, and he was there to teach in a Catholic seminary. And the treatment of the prisoners in this seminary and the conditions that he and they were living in brought him to a nervous breakdown. And when he came back to Cornwall, where he lived, he was encouraged by his doctor, who was very forward thinking, to start watching crows. And he then became an expert on crows. So I really, this is one of these books that's a bit like a conversation. It takes you down lots of different avenues. I thought it was wonderful. And finally, now I only finished this book this morning, and you know, when a book is sort of it's been mulling around, I've been for a long walk today, and it's been mulling around in my head all day. Sorry, it's getting quite dark in here now. I was hoping I'd managed to record this video without having to switch any lights on, so I'll try and be quick. But this is, excuse me, Alice Chadwick's Dark Like Under. Now this picked up when I was with Simon down in London at Daunt Bookshops, and this is one that Daunt have published themselves. Oh my goodness, what a really interesting novel. It's a big book, it's quite heavy, but I whipped through it. I think I've only been reading it for 2 or 3 days. It's about, what is it about? It's really hard to say. It's the 1980s, and it's basically a class of teenagers, late, sort of in I think they're 15, 16-year-olds, approaching the exams that we take in the UK, GCSEs, which would have been O-levels in those days, which we take when we're 16. And their teacher, one of their teachers, has committed suicide at the start of the novel. And the novel takes place over the course of a single day. So each chapter is kind of time stamped and the place where it happens. So it's like it's almost like a camera moving around. This would make a brilliant TV program. It's almost like a camera moving around at different times of day, and I can't get my words out, different times of day as the day progresses. But it moves from person to person or group of people. So sometimes you're in the classroom, sometimes you're walking to school with a kid. It takes place chronologically as well. It follows the day from start to finish. And initially I found it quite hard going because there are so many characters. There are lots of teenagers, but also you're introduced to parents, you're introduced, the family backgrounds, you kind of go into each of their houses, a bit like a soap opera. But you also get to know some of the teachers as well. And the novel is looking at the impact of this teacher's death on the school day. Sometimes the kids are more preoccupied with the fact that he's not going to mark their work because he's died. But at other times, the reaction to his death is really traumatic. And I think that's probably quite realistic. Each of the teenagers is grappling with, various existential crises. And I think they're, on the whole, really, really well drawn, because, of course, having been a teacher myself, I'm always very sensitive to and often put off by books that take place in schools, particularly secondary schools. But I think, on the whole, she handles this really, really well. The only gripe I had was the fact that there's a lesson on Hamlet, and the level of discussion that the students are having about Hamlet is way beyond anything that ever even happened in my A-level classes. It was more like, for me, the conversation was more like the sort of conversation you might expect in a university seminar. But that might just be a reflection on the students that I had the good fortune to teach. I don't know. Don't get me wrong. I've taught some extremely bright kids. But that did sort of make me smile a little bit. I felt, yeah, I felt that their responses were perhaps overly ambitious. But hey, what do I know? That could be happening in other schools around the country. And I don't know. There are so many, there are lots of nods to the 1980s as well. So you know, this is a period when I was at school, and it rang fairly true and brought back lots of memories. There's reference to music and chocolate bars and things like that, and toys. So anyone born in the 80s would probably get that extra kind of nuance from the born who was a teenager in the 80s might get that extra nuance from the book, I think. And also there's kind of these two factions in the school, which again, you know, having worked in schools, I think happens over time. So you've got, you know, the kind of the old guard who want to do things in a really traditional way, and then you've got the younger teachers, not necessarily the younger teachers actually, but the teachers who are a bit more broad-minded, who maybe let the kids in a little bit more, perhaps have more personal relationships with the children, and I found that really interesting as well. Yeah, I loved it. Some brilliant characters in here, and I think it's a book that is going to, like a fine wine, kind of mature in my head over time. Oh, and the other thing I should say, my goodness, she can write. I don't think this might have been her first novel. I think she was 50 when she wrote it, and I love the fact a lot of the novel is in the present tense. It's not, you know, not solely moves from present to past, but it's really immersive. It's quite sort of stream of consciousnessy, but the writing is really, really beautiful. Yeah, loved it. So there we go. I had a great reading month. Something's just fallen off my chair. I don't know what it was. Really, really enjoyed it. If you've read any of these books and you'd like to comment below, please do. And I'm just hoping that December brings some equally good reads as well. I would imagine I'll be reading quite a lot in December. It's getting chilly here, and the nights, you know, it's getting dark at 4 o'clock. As you can see, I've got about half an hour to go. So I'm going to go now. Take care, everybody.